The massive ships appeared in Earth's sky without warning on a Tuesday morning. Commander Vexthanor stood on the bridge of his harvester vessel and looked down at the small blue planet below. His red eyes glowed with satisfaction as he studied the primitive world spinning slowly beneath his fleet. For 3,000 years, the Zephyrian Empire had grown strong by taking slaves from worlds like this one. They would arrive, show their power, and watch as the weak species below would surrender. Then they would take the strongest beings to work in their mines and factories across the galaxy. It was simple work that always ended the same way. Vexthanor had done this same job on 47 different worlds. He knew exactly how it would go. First, they would destroy some cities to show their strength. Then the leaders would try to fight with their weak weapons. After a few days, the survivors would give up and beg for mercy. Finally, his ships would fill with new slaves and return home. The planet below looked perfect for harvesting. The beings, they were the right size for heavy work. They had built cities and roads so they were smart enough to follow orders. Their weapons shot small metal pieces that could not hurt Zephyrian armor. Their flying machines were slow and clumsy compared to Imperial fighters. Jake Morrison was eating breakfast with his family when the news came on. The tall soldier had fought in 3 wars for his country, but he had never seen anything like the images on the television screen. Giant black ships hung in the sky over major cities around the world. They were bigger than anything humans had ever built. His wife, Lisa, grabbed his hand as they watched the first plasma beams strike downtown Los Angeles. The buildings turned to ash in seconds. Military jets tried to attack the alien ships, but their missiles bounced off invisible shields like toys thrown at a wall. "Daddy, what's happening?" asked their 10-year-old daughter Emma. She had been playing with her toys on the living room floor, but now she stared at the terrible pictures on the screen. Jake pulled Emma close and tried to keep his voice calm. "Some bad people from space have come to visit, but don't worry. Daddy and his friends will take care of it." Lisa looked at her husband with fear in her eyes. She was a combat medic and had seen enough war to know when something was hopeless. The alien weapons were destroying entire city blocks in seconds. Earth's most powerful military forces were being brushed aside like insects. Jake's phone rang. It was his commanding officer calling all soldiers back to base immediately. Every military unit in the country was being activated for what everyone knew would be humanity's last stand. The attack began at dawn the next day. Zephyrian dropships descended from the mother vessels like deadly rain. Each ship carried 50 soldiers in powered armor that made them look like metal giants. Their weapons fired bolts of pure energy that could melt through tank armor. Captain Jake Morrison led his men from the ruins of Colorado Springs as the aliens advanced across the city. His soldiers fired everything they had at the invaders, but their bullets could not pierce the energy shields that surrounded each alien warrior. "Fall back to the school," Jake shouted over the sound of plasma fire. His remaining 30 men ran through the burning streets as alien fighters screamed overhead. Behind them, the elementary school had been turned into a makeshift fortress. Lisa was already there with her medical supplies, treating wounded soldiers in the basement. She had sent Emma and the other children to hide in the old fallout shelter beneath the building. The concrete walls might stop the alien weapons for a while. Dr. Sam Rodriguez worked frantically in his laboratory at NORAD as the mountain base shook under enemy bombardment. The scientist had been studying the alien technology since the first attacks began. His instruments showed that their weapons and shields followed the same laws of physics as everything else in the universe. "Their shields pulse at exactly 60 cycles per second," he said into his radio as explosions echoed through the tunnels. "If we can time our shots between the pulses, we might be able to get through." Sam knew the base would fall soon, but he had to get this information to the resistance fighters hiding in the mountains. He connected his radio to the emergency broadcast system and began transmitting everything he had learned about the aliens. The message reached Jake just as his position was about to be overrun. He grabbed the radio and listened to the scientist's words. The shields had a rhythm. There was a tiny gap when they reset. It might be enough. "Everyone sync your watches," Jake told his men. "When I give the signal, we all fire at the same time right between the shield pulses." The alien soldiers advanced through the school hallway, their metal boots crushing broken glass. They expected the humans to surrender like every other species they had conquered. Instead, they found determined fighters who refused to give up even when facing certain death. Jake counted down the seconds and gave the signal. 30 rifles fired as one in the brief moment when the alien shields flickered. 3 of the enemy soldiers fell, their armor finally pierced by perfectly timed shots. For the first time since the invasion began, humans had killed their attackers. The news spread through ham radio networks to resistance cells around the world. The aliens could be hurt. They could die. The war was not over yet, but the victory came at a terrible price. The alien commander was furious that primitive beings had killed his soldiers. He ordered his ships to level the entire area. Plasma beams rained down from orbit, turning the school and everything around it into a crater of molten glass. Jake and his family barely escaped through drainage tunnels that led to the mountains. As they climbed through the dark underground passages, they could hear the sounds of their city being destroyed above them. Everything they had ever known was gone, but they were still alive and still fighting. Commander Vexathaner studied the reports from the surface with growing concern. The humans were not surrendering as they should. Instead of breaking under pressure, they seemed to become more dangerous when cornered. Some of his best soldiers had been killed by primitives using crude weapons and clever timing. The harvest, that should have taken 3 months, was already behind schedule. The High Council would not be pleased if this simple operation dragged on much longer. Perhaps these humans just needed a stronger demonstration of Zephyrian power before they would submit. Vex Thanor ordered his fleet to increase the bombardment of human cities. Surely the survivors would surrender once they saw that resistance was useless. He did not understand that he was dealing with a species that became more determined to fight with each loss they suffered. In hidden caves and underground bunkers around the world, the remaining humans began to organize. They had learned their first lesson about fighting aliens, and they were already planning their next move. 6 months had passed since the aliens first arrived, and Commander Vex Thanor was learning that humans were unlike any species he had ever encountered. His reports to the High Council grew longer each week as he tried to explain why the harvest was taking so much time. The humans refused to follow the pattern that every other conquered species had shown. When the Zephyrians destroyed their cities, the survivors did not gather in refugee camps to await processing. Instead, they scattered into small groups and disappeared into places the aliens could not easily reach. Kate Williams crouched in the shadows of an abandoned car factory in Detroit, watching an alien patrol move through the rubble-filled streets below. The former Marine sergeant had lost everything in the first week of fighting, but she had gained something too. She had learned to hunt creatures that thought they were the hunters. Her team of 12 survivors had turned the ruined factory into a fortress and workshop. They spent their days making weapons from car parts and copper wire, following the instructions that Dr. Rodriguez had broadcast before his base fell. The crude devices could disrupt alien electronics for just a few seconds, but that was enough time for a skilled marksman to find the weak spots in their armor. Kate raised her hand and made a silent signal to her fighters. The alien patrol was moving in their usual pattern, just as they had every day for the past month. The Zephyrians were creatures of habit, following the same routes and procedures that had worked on dozens of other worlds. The first EMP device activated with a soft pop, and the lead alien stumbled as his suit systems failed. Kate's rifle spoke, once sending a bullet through the gap between his helmet and chest armor. Before the other aliens could react, 2 more EMP bursts disabled their shields, and 2 more humans fell to carefully aimed shots. The surviving aliens ran back toward their base, carrying their wounded with them. Kate smiled grimly as she watched them go. Each attack taught the humans more about alien weaknesses, while the invaders learned nothing except that Earth was becoming a very dangerous place for them. In labor camps across the planet, the Zephyrians were discovering another unpleasant truth about their new slaves. Dr. Amy Foster worked slowly at her assigned station in the Houston processing facility, pretending to be a frightened civilian, while she studied every detail of alien technology around her. The camp supervisors expected their prisoners to work efficiently under threat of punishment. Instead, they found themselves managing a workforce that seemed determined to cause as much trouble as possible. Tools broke at exactly the wrong moments. Power systems failed when they were needed most. Production quotas were never quite met, despite constant threats. Amy had been a NASA engineer before the invasion, and she understood complex systems better than most people. As she pretended to struggle with simple assembly tasks, she memorized the design of every alien device she could see. The Zephyrians had made their technology foolproof for their own soldiers, but they had also made it predictable for anyone smart enough to study it carefully. The aliens increased punishments when production fell behind schedule, but this only made the humans more creative in their resistance. When guards were not watching, messages passed between workers in dozens of different languages. Plans formed and changed like water flowing around obstacles, always finding new ways to cause problems for their captors. Tony Garcia moved through the ventilation shafts of the Denver detention center like a ghost, carrying equipment that had been smuggled in piece by piece over several weeks. The former Special Forces operator had spent years learning to fight in places where enemies expected him to be helpless. His mission was simple, but deadly dangerous. Somewhere in this facility, the aliens were holding a damaged patrol ship that his team needed to study. The information they could learn from intact alien technology might be worth more than 100 successful raids. Tony dropped silently into the maintenance bay, where the alien craft waited under repair. 2 Zephyrian technicians worked on the damaged engines, their backs turned to the shadows where he hid. He waited patiently for exactly the right moment, then moved with the swift precision that had made him one of the military's best soldiers. The first alien died without making a sound. The second had time to reach for his weapon before Tony's knife found the gap in his armor. Within minutes, the human fighter was copying data from the ship's computer systems and photographing every component he could reach. The alarm sounded just as Tony finished his work, but he was already moving toward his escape route. Behind him, the alien patrol ship exploded as the thermite charges he had planted destroyed all evidence of what he had taken. The Zephyrians would know their security had been breached, but they would not know how much the humans had learned. Across the mountains of Colorado, Jake Morrison studied the intelligence reports that flowed in from resistance cells around the world. His wife Lisa worked beside him, treating wounded fighters who arrived daily at their hidden camp. Their daughter Emma helped where she could, carrying supplies and messages between the adults who were planning humanity's next moves. The information that Tony and others like him gathered painted a picture of an enemy that was powerful but not invincible. The aliens relied heavily on their technology and standard procedures. They had been so successful for so long that they had stopped expecting real opposition from the species they conquered. Jake spread alien weapon blueprints across a makeshift table and pointed to key components. "Look here," he told the engineers and soldiers gathered around him. "Their plasma rifles need exactly 4 seconds to recharge between shots. That's 4 seconds when each alien is vulnerable." Lisa looked up from the wounded man she was treating and added her own observations. "Their armor is strongest at the chest and back, but the joints are weak points. A blade or small caliber bullet can penetrate if the angle is right." Young fighters like 16-year-old Alex Turner absorbed every word with frightening intensity. The boy had lost his entire family in the first attacks, and he had grown up fast in a world where childhood was a luxury no one could afford. He thought about war in ways that troubled even experienced soldiers, but his insights were often the most valuable. "They always retreat when they take casualties," Alex said quietly. "They're not used to fighting enemies who fight back effectively. We can use that fear against them." The resistance had learned to coordinate their attacks across vast distances, using salvaged radios and coded messages. When alien reinforcements moved to counter one threat, they would find themselves facing attacks from completely different directions. The humans were thinking and acting like a single organism spread across the entire planet. Commander Vex Thanor read the latest casualty reports with growing alarm. His forces were losing soldiers every day to what should have been helpless primitives. Worse yet, the humans were becoming more effective with each passing week, as if they were learning from every encounter. The High Council was demanding answers that he did not have. How could a species that had never traveled beyond their own moon be causing so much trouble for the greatest military force in the galaxy? Their weapons were crude, their technology was primitive, and their civilization should have collapsed within days of the initial assault. Yet somehow these humans continued to fight with a determination that made no logical sense. They suffered losses that would have broken any rational species, but instead of surrendering, they simply adapted their tactics and found new ways to kill his soldiers. Vex Thanar requested additional troops and equipment, but the Empire was busy with more profitable ventures. The High Council granted him minimal reinforcements and ordered him to complete the harvest within one more Earth year. As he looked down at the planet below, the alien commander began to suspect that he had made a terrible mistake. His species had encountered thousands of primitive worlds over the centuries, but none had ever produced fighters like these humans. They were changing the rules of a game that had remained the same for 3,000 years, and he was not sure his forces would be able to adapt quickly enough to win. On the surface below, humanity continued its transformation from victim to predator, learning with each battle how to turn their weaknesses into strengths and their desperation into weapons that could kill even the mighty Zephyrian Empire. 1 year after the first ships appeared in Earth's sky, the war had become something that neither species had expected. Commander Vex Thanar stood in his command center and studied reports that would have seemed impossible when the invasion began. His forces now controlled less than half of the planet's surface, and even that territory was constantly under attack. The humans had stopped thinking like prey and started thinking like predators. Every day brought new casualties among his soldiers, and every week the primitive species below seemed to develop new ways to kill Zephyrians. Colonel Ryan Murphy led his transformed army through the mountains of North Carolina, moving with the silence that had become second nature to every human fighter. What had started as a desperate group of refugees was now an efficient killing force that treated alien patrols like prey animals to be hunted and destroyed. The former commander of Fort Bragg had spent months teaching civilian survivors how to think like soldiers. Now he was learning from them as they taught him how to think like guerrilla fighters. Together, they had created something that no military academy in the galaxy would have recognized as a proper fighting force, but it worked with devastating effectiveness. Ryan's scouts had identified an alien supply convoy moving through the valley below. The enemy vehicles followed the same route they had used for months, protected by the same number of guards using the same defensive formation. The Zephyrians were still fighting the war they had planned to fight, while the humans had evolved into something entirely different. "Remember, we take everything we can carry," Ryan whispered to his team leaders. "Weapons, equipment, communication devices. Leave nothing for them to recover." The attack began with carefully placed explosives that destroyed the lead and rear vehicles simultaneously. As the aliens scrambled to respond, human fighters emerged from concealment all around them. Plasma weapons captured from previous raids joined the sounds of conventional firearms as the convoy was systematically destroyed. Maria Santos moved through the ruins of Phoenix like a ghost, leading her urban warfare specialists on another hunting expedition. The veteran fighter had learned to read alien behavior patterns like a book, studying each enemy patrol until she knew their habits better than they did. Her team had identified a Zephyrian officer who always inspected the same defensive positions at the same time each day. The alien was careful and professional, but he was also predictable in the way that all members of his species seemed to be. Maria waited in the shadow of a collapsed building as the officer approached with his bodyguards. She had studied this particular group for 3 weeks, learning which alien would react first to danger and which direction each would move when attacked. The knowledge allowed her team to plan their ambush with surgical precision. The attack lasted less than 30 seconds. When it was over, 4 alien soldiers were dead, and their equipment was already being carried away by human fighters who disappeared into the ruins like smoke. The psychological impact on the remaining Zephyrian forces was exactly what Maria had intended. Dr. Sam Rodriguez worked in his hidden laboratory beneath the abandoned subway tunnels of New York, surrounded by alien technology that his team had somehow made functional using human engineering principles. The breakthrough had taken months of trial and error, but they had finally cracked the basic principles behind Zephyrian plasma weapons. The crude devices his team produced were not as elegant as the originals, but they were reliable and could be manufactured using materials salvaged from Earth's destroyed cities. More importantly, they had modified the design to work better for human physiology and tactics. The power cells last twice as long as the alien versions, Sam explained to the resistance leaders who had come to see his work. We redesigned the cooling system to handle rapid fire, and the targeting system is calibrated for human reflexes. The reverse-engineered technology was spreading to resistance cells across the planet through a network of hidden workshops and communication links. Humans were not just adapting alien equipment anymore, they were improving it and making it serve their own purposes. Jake Morrison had become something that would have frightened the man he had been before the war. The soldier who had once protected and served his country now commanded a continental network of fighters whose only goal was the complete destruction of their enemies. His wife Lisa had died 6 months ago during a raid on an alien research facility, but her sacrifice had provided intelligence that saved thousands of human lives. Jake carried her memory with him like a weapon, using his grief to fuel a cold determination that impressed even his most hardened fighters. Standing before a gathering of resistance leaders from across North America, Jake outlined the next phase of their war. The defensive fighting was over. The time had come to take the battle directly to their enemies. They expect us to hide and run, he said, pointing to maps that showed alien strongholds across the continent. We're going to do the opposite. We're going to hunt them down systematically and eliminate their ability to control our world. The plan was ambitious beyond anything the Resistance had attempted before. Coordinated strikes on alien command posts, supply lines, and communication centers would be followed by raids on their orbital platforms. The humans were no longer fighting for survival. They were fighting for victory. Alex Turner had grown from a frightened boy into a young man whose tactical insights often surprised veteran soldiers. At 18, he commanded his own unit of fighters who had all learned warfare in the same brutal school that had shaped him. His generation thought about combat differently than the older fighters. They had never known peace, so they felt no moral constraints about the methods they used to kill their enemies. They studied alien psychology like scientists studying lab animals, looking for weaknesses they could exploit. The officer caste always wears different armor markings, Alex explained to a group of new recruits. If you can identify and eliminate their leaders first, the rest of the unit becomes confused and vulnerable. The young commander's methods were ruthlessly effective, but they worried some of the adults who remembered what humanity had been like before the war. The children who had grown up during the occupation were becoming something harder and more dangerous than previous generations had ever needed to be. Dr. Amy Foster's work inside the alien research facility had yielded more than just technical knowledge. She had learned to understand Zephyrian military doctrine, and what she discovered was both encouraging and terrifying. The Empire had not changed its basic strategies in over 1,000 years. They had become so successful through technological superiority that they had stopped innovating tactically. Their entire military structure was designed to fight conventional wars against opponents who would eventually surrender. But humans were not following the script that had worked on hundreds of other worlds. They were writing new rules for asymmetrical warfare that the Zephyrians had no experience countering. The Empire's greatest strength was becoming its greatest weakness. Amy used her knowledge to help plan Operation Feedback, a deception campaign that fed false information to alien commanders through captured communication systems. The results exceeded everyone's expectations when 3 Zephyrian ships in orbit accidentally fired on each other while attempting to bombard what they thought were human strongholds. Commander Vexathanor faced a crisis that threatened his career and possibly his life. The High Council was demanding explanations for why a simple harvesting operation had turned into the longest military campaign in recent Imperial history. His soldiers were reporting encounters with human fighters who seemed to anticipate their every move. Equipment was being sabotaged faster than it could be repaired. Supply convoys were being destroyed by opponents who struck like lightning and disappeared before reinforcements could arrive. Most disturbing of all, the humans were no longer content to simply defend themselves. They were actively hunting Zephyrian forces with a coordination and effectiveness that suggested they had developed their own advanced military doctrine. The reports from his field commanders painted a picture of an enemy that was evolving faster than Imperial forces could adapt. These primitive beings were not just learning from their encounters with superior technology, they were improving upon it and using it against its creators. Vexthanor's final request for massive reinforcements was denied by the High Council, who considered the loss of one harvest fleet an acceptable cost compared to the expense of a full-scale military campaign. They ordered him to complete the operation with existing resources or abandon the system entirely. But as the alien commander looked down at the planet that should have been easily conquered, he realized that the humans might not allow his forces to simply leave. They had evolved beyond mere survival into something that actively sought the destruction of their enemies. The species that had once cowered in their cities was now hunting his soldiers with the patience and skill of apex predators. 2 years had passed since the Zephyrian ships first darkened Earth's skies, and the war had become something unprecedented in galactic history. Commander Vexthanor's forces were no longer conducting a harvesting operation, they were fighting for their very survival against an enemy that had transformed beyond all recognition. The humans had stopped thinking like the victims they had been, and started thinking like the apex predators they had become. Every alien position was under constant threat. Every patrol faced potential annihilation, and every day brought new demonstrations of human tactical evolution. Jake Morrison stood in his command center deep within the Rocky Mountains, studying intelligence reports from across multiple continents. The man who had once been a simple soldier protecting his family had become the supreme commander of humanity's war effort, coordinating operations that spanned the entire globe. His transformation mirrored that of his species. The moral constraints that had once limited human warfare were disappearing as survival gave way to something darker and more determined. Jake no longer fought to drive the aliens away. He fought to ensure they could never threaten another world. The Reichkar orbital assault begins at dawn, he told the gathered resistance leaders. Kate's teams will hit their ground installations simultaneously, while Tony's special forces infiltrate their command ship. The plan was ambitious beyond anything humanity had ever attempted. They were not just fighting back anymore. They were actively seeking to capture alien technology and eliminate the enemy's ability to retreat and regroup. The species that had been marked for slavery was now hunting its would-be masters. Captain Kate Williams moved through the Detroit industrial complex that served as the aliens' main ground base on the North American continent. Her urban warfare specialists had spent weeks studying the facility, learning every guard rotation and security protocol until they knew the enemy's patterns better than the aliens did themselves. The attack began with simultaneous explosions that destroyed the base's power grid and communication arrays. As Zephyrian soldiers stumbled through darkened corridors, human fighters emerged from hiding places that had been prepared months in advance. Kate led her team through the chaos with ruthless efficiency. They were no longer the desperate survivors who had hidden in ruins and sewers. They had become something that the galaxy had never seen before. Humans who fought with the precision of machines while retaining the tactical flexibility that made their species so dangerous. The battle lasted 4 hours and ended with the complete destruction of the alien facility. More importantly, Kate's forces captured intact examples of advanced Zephyrian technology, including atmospheric fighters and orbital communication equipment. Sarah Kim had been a test pilot before the invasion, pushing experimental aircraft to their limits in the Nevada desert. Now she found herself studying the controls of a captured alien fighter, trying to understand systems that had been designed for a completely different species. The learning curve was steep, but Sarah had always been exceptional at adapting to new aircraft. Within days, she was conducting test flights in the alien craft, pushing its capabilities while human technicians recorded every detail of its performance. The power plant generates 3 times more thrust than our best jets, she reported to the engineering teams. But the control systems are designed for reflexes that are slower than human normal. We can push these machines harder than their original pilots ever could. The implications were staggering. Humans were not just capturing alien technology, they were learning to use it better than the aliens themselves. The species advantage that had made the Zephyrians successful across the galaxy was being turned against them. Tony Garcia and his Special Forces team had achieved what everyone considered impossible. They had infiltrated the alien command ship, orbiting high above Earth's surface. The mission had cost the lives of half his men, but the survivors now moved through the vessel's corridors like ghosts, gathering intelligence and planting explosives. The ship was a marvel of alien engineering, but Tony's trained eyes quickly identified its weaknesses. The Zephyrians had built their technology to be reliable rather than secure, assuming that no primitive species would ever gain access to their most advanced systems. Their computer networks are completely open, Tony whispered into his communicator as he downloaded files from a command terminal. They never expected anyone to hack their systems from the inside. The intelligence he gathered revealed the true scope of the Zephyrian Empire and its vulnerabilities. More importantly, it provided the locations of other Imperial fleets and the communication codes needed to contact enslaved species throughout the galaxy. Dr. Sam Rodriguez had achieved the breakthrough that changed everything. Working in his underground laboratory, his team had successfully reverse-engineered Zephyrian faster-than-light communication technology. For the first time since the invasion began, humanity could reach beyond their solar system. But instead of calling for help, they began broadcasting something that terrified the aliens far more than any distress signal. Detailed tactical analyses, weapon specifications, and proof that the Empire could be defeated were transmitted to every corner of the galaxy. "We're not just fighting for Earth anymore," Sam explained to the resistance leaders who had come to understand the implications of his work. "We're starting a revolution that will spread to every world the Empire has ever conquered. Across the galaxy, enslaved species that had suffered under Zephyrian rule for centuries began receiving broadcasts that showed them their oppressors could bleed and die. The technical information included in the transmissions provided blueprints for weapons and tactics that could level the playing field against Imperial technology." Alex Turner commanded a combined arms unit that would have been unrecognizable to military theorists from before the war. His fighters used captured alien equipment alongside human innovations, creating hybrid weapon systems that were more effective than either technology alone. At 20 years old, Alex had never known peace, and his tactical thinking reflected a generation that had learned warfare under the most brutal conditions imaginable. His units didn't just defeat alien positions, they eliminated them so completely that other Zephyrian forces began surrendering rather than face annihilation. "The key is never giving them time to adapt," Alex explained to a group of junior commanders. "We hit them with everything at once from directions they don't expect, using methods they've never encountered before." His approach to warfare was revolutionary in its simplicity and terrifying in its effectiveness. The young human had learned to think like a predator that viewed its prey not as opponents to be defeated, but as threats to be completely eliminated. Dr. Amy Foster's intelligence work had revealed something that changed humanity's entire strategic outlook. The Zephyrian Empire was not the invincible force it appeared to be. It was a declining civilization that had grown complacent through centuries of easy victories against primitive opponents. Their military doctrine had not evolved in over a millennium because they had never needed to adapt. Their technology was advanced but predictable because no enemy had ever forced them to innovate. Most importantly, their entire social structure depended on maintaining the myth of imperial invincibility. If we can prove that humans can defeat the Empire decisively, their entire civilization will collapse, Amy explained to the Strategic Planning Committee. Half the galaxy will rise in rebellion, and the other half will abandon the Zephyrians rather than face the same fate. The Resistance realized that their war was no longer about Earth's survival. It was about dismantling an empire and liberating hundreds of enslaved species. The scope of their mission had expanded beyond anything they had originally imagined, but so had their capabilities. Commander Vex the Nor made his final desperate gambit, threatening to destroy Earth's entire biosphere unless the humans surrendered immediately. His massive orbital weapons could indeed sterilize the planet's surface, turning it into a lifeless rock floating in space. Jake Morrison's response was broadcast on all frequencies, reaching not just the alien commander, but resistance movements on dozens of worlds throughout the galaxy. His words carried the weight of a species that had been pushed beyond its breaking point and emerged as something harder and more dangerous than anything the Empire had ever faced. "You came here looking for slaves," Jake said calmly, staring directly into the camera that would carry his image across the stars. "You stayed for a war. Now you're going to leave as a warning to anyone else who thinks humanity is weak." The final battle for Earth began not with the defense of remaining human strongholds, but with a coordinated assault on every alien position simultaneously. Humanity was no longer fighting for survival. They were fighting for victory, and they were prepared to pay any price to achieve it. The final assault on the Zephyrian occupation forces began with the rising sun on a clear morning in the third year of the war. Humanity had evolved far beyond what their enemies thought possible, and now they were ready to demonstrate just how dangerous an underestimated species could become. Sarah Kim sat in the cockpit of a captured Zephyrian fighter, leading a squadron of human pilots who had mastered alien technology with frightening speed. The atmospheric craft responded to her commands with precision that exceeded anything their original designers had intended, pushed beyond safe limits by pilots who understood that victory was worth any risk. "All units, this is Ghost Leader." Sarah spoke into her communicator as her squadron approached the alien orbital platform. "Remember, we're not just fighting for Earth anymore. Every species in the galaxy is watching what we do today." Her fighters screamed through the upper atmosphere, toward targets that had seemed untouchable just months before. The pilots who flew with her had learned their skills during the occupation, transforming from ground-bound humans into predators who could hunt their enemies in 3 dimensions. Tony Garcia moved through the corridors of the Zephyrian command, ship like death itself, leading his surviving team members toward the vessel's central computer core. The Special Forces operator had spent weeks studying the ship's layout, identifying critical systems, and planning the sequence of destruction that would cripple the alien fleet. The resistance he encountered was fierce but predictable. Zephyrian soldiers fought with professional competence, but they had never faced opponents who combined human creativity with their own advanced technology. Tony's team used captured alien weapons with modifications that made them deadlier than their original specifications allowed. "Charges are set," Tony reported as explosions echoed through the ship around him. "The navigation systems will fail in 10 minutes and life support will follow 30 seconds later." But destruction was not his primary objective. Even as the command ship began to die around him, Tony was downloading the complete database of Imperial military assets, slave worlds, and communication protocols. The intelligence would be worth more than the destruction of an entire fleet. Kate Williams led her urban warfare specialists in the systematic elimination of every alien ground installation across the North American continent. Her forces moved with a coordination that would have impressed regular military units, but they fought with an intensity that regular soldiers could never have sustained. The battles were not fair fights. Kate's fighters had abandoned the concept of honorable combat in favor of total effectiveness. They used every advantage they could create, from captured alien technology to psychological warfare that exploited their enemies' growing fear of human unpredictability. "Sector 7 is clear," reported one of her team leaders as another alien stronghold fell to concentrated assault. "No survivors, all equipment secured for transport." Kate nodded approvingly. The humans were no longer taking prisoners or showing mercy to opponents who had never intended to show mercy to them. The species that had been marked for slavery was demonstrating what happened when predators disguised themselves as prey. Dr. Sam Rodriguez worked frantically in his laboratory as the battle raged overhead, coordinating the transmission of critical intelligence to resistance movements throughout the galaxy. His breakthrough in faster-than-light communication had transformed a local rebellion into the spark that would ignite a galactic revolution. The data flowing through his systems included everything Tony's team had stolen from the command ship: fleet positions, supply routes, command codes, and most importantly, the locations of every enslaved species in the Empire. Within hours, hundreds of worlds would know exactly how to hurt their oppressors. "The Altarian system is receiving our transmissions," Sam announced to the command staff. "So are the mining colonies in the Centauri sector and the agricultural worlds near the galactic rim. They're all getting the same message. The Empire can be beaten." The rebellion was spreading faster than even the most optimistic projections had suggested. Species that had been enslaved for centuries were rising against their oppressors, using human tactical innovations to overcome technological disadvantages that had seemed insurmountable. Alex Turner had become something that even hardened veterans found disturbing to watch in action. The young commander led his hybrid unit through alien defensive positions with a systematic thoroughness that left nothing standing and no enemies alive. His fighters were the children of war, raised in a world where mercy was a luxury that humanity could not afford. They fought with captured alien weapons that they had modified beyond recognition, creating hybrid technologies that were more deadly than anything either species had developed alone. Final position neutralized, Alex reported as the last alien stronghold in his sector was reduced to smoking rubble. All personnel eliminated, all equipment secured, ready for orbital assault phase. At 20 years old, Alex commanded respect from soldiers twice his age because he understood warfare in ways that peacetime training could never teach. He had learned to think like an apex predator that viewed every enemy as a threat to be completely eliminated. Jake Morrison stood in his command center and watched as reports flowed in from every theater of the global assault. The coordinated attack was succeeding beyond his most optimistic projections, but success brought new responsibilities that weighed heavily on his shoulders. He was no longer just fighting for his family or his country. He was leading humanity's transformation into something that could protect the galaxy from predators like the Zephyrian Empire. The species that had been victims were becoming liberators, whether they were ready for that role or not. All primary. Objective secured, came the reports from around the world. Enemy ground forces eliminated. Orbital platforms under assault. Fleet assets being captured intact. Jake allowed himself a moment of satisfaction before turning to the next phase of the operation. The war was ending, but humanity's real mission was just beginning. They had proven that the Empire could be defeated. Now they had to make sure it could never threaten another world. Commander Vexthanor watched his fleet being systematically destroyed by opponents who should have been helpless slaves. The humans had not just defeated his forces, they had captured most of his ships intact and were already learning to operate them with disturbing competence. The reports from his surviving officers painted a picture of total tactical failure. These primitive beings had evolved into something that the Empire had no experience fighting. They combined technological adaptation with strategic innovation in ways that made them more dangerous than any opponent the Zephyrians had ever faced. His final transmission to the High Council was a warning that came too late to save his empire. They are not like other species, he reported as human fighters breached his command bridge. They learn from every encounter, they adapt to every weapon, and they never stop fighting until their enemies are completely destroyed. The last message ever sent by a Zephyrian military commander was cut short as Jake Morrison's forces took control of the alien flagship. The harvest fleet that had come to Earth seeking slaves was now under human control, crewed by the very beings it had been sent to capture. Dr. Amy Foster stood on the bridge of the captured command ship and looked down at Earth through viewports that had once belonged to humanity's would-be conquerors. The intelligence she had gathered during her time in alien captivity was now being used to plan operations that would span the galaxy. We have confirmed responses from 47 different star systems, she reported to Jake as he joined her at the viewport. Enslaved species throughout the Empire are rising in coordinated rebellion. The revolution has begun. Jake nodded slowly, understanding the full implications of what they had started. Humanity had not just won their freedom, they had become the catalyst for the liberation of hundreds of worlds. The responsibility was overwhelming, but so were the possibilities. Within months, human expeditionary forces would be departing Earth in captured Zephyrian vessels, carrying tactical innovations and hybrid technologies to resistance movements across the galaxy. The species that had been marked for slavery would become the galaxy's liberators. Sarah Kim took her position as commander of the First Interstellar Fleet, studying star charts that showed the locations of Empire strongholds and enslaved worlds. The pilot who had learned to fly alien fighters was now preparing to carry humanity's revolution to the stars. Course laid in for the Zephyrian home system, she reported to Jake as the fleet prepared for departure. Estimated travel time, 6 months. Intelligence suggests their defenses are designed to repel conventional attacks from inferior technology. Jake smiled grimly as he authorized the mission that would carry humanity beyond their home system for the first time. The aliens had made a fatal error in judgment when they attacked Earth. They had expected to find slaves, but had created something far more dangerous, a species of warriors who would never stop fighting until justice was served. The final transmission, from Earth to the dying Zephyrian Empire, carried a message that would be remembered throughout galactic history. Kate Williams, speaking for all of humanity,